What I wanted to ask my own self a question here. It's a question that came up last night, and I think that especially for staffers here, I'd like you to know, for what it's worth, how I feel about the cavalier way that people talk about regime change, people talk about going into Iran, people talk about zapping their nuclear potential or their nuclear installations. It's very similar to Vietnam, when the generals used to talk about, well, worst comes to worst, we can nuke these guys. The path starts with Israel provoking an incident, or we and Israel doing something that Iran has to retaliate against. They've been very circumspect, but there are certain events that they will have to retaliate against. And then all hell breaks loose, folks. All hell breaks loose. The straits are closed. Now, Admiral Mullen was asked, don't the Iranians have the capability to close the straits? And he gulped and he said, yes, they do. Oh, but we could reopen them in a short period of time. Well, give me a break. How are you going to reopen the straits, huh? You're going to send the Marines in. Where are you going to get the Marines from? There aren't any extra Marines. It's a problem, folks. Now, what else can they do? Those of you who have been in the military know about LOCs, huh? Lines of communication, okay? Look at our line of communication between Kuwait and Baghdad. They could easily sever that thing and take not 52 hostages this time, but 52,000 U.S. servicemen and women north of where they sever that line, or south. They have that capability, folks. They have the capability of hitting Israel. They have all kinds of capability, and I think they would be inclined to use at least some of them. They don't want to commit suicide, so they may be restrained in retaliating directly against Israel, but they have all manner of other opportunities. All those boats in the Persian Gulf, I mean, they swarm, and we lose a destroyer or worse. So what's the bottom line here? Well, the bottom line here is that it's a I try to say this to the congressman last night. For me, it's a conscience problem. If Iran does not pose a strategic danger to us, then where do we get off taking young people from the towns of less than 10,000 people in this country and from the inner city and sending them out there to what? To reopen the straits? For what? A lot of people have already died, folks, from this kind of reasoning. And I think that, I don't know if I persuaded anybody last night, but People had just come back from Israel and they talked about Israel. If we don't do it, the Israelis are going to. Well, we ought to be clear on what the Israelis might do, and we ought to be just as firm as Admiral Mullen was in June of 2008 in going there to Tel Aviv and saying, don't you even think of perpetrating the kind of incident in the Gulf that will get us enmeshed with you in a war. And he even raised the USS Liberty incident from June 8th, 1967, which has been covered up by this government. Look it up, ussliberty.org, okay? So, last little thing here. Where was Admiral Mullen on Sunday? Anybody know? Nobody knows. I guess it hasn't been in the papers. If you look at the Iranian press TV, simple report, Admiral Mullen was in Normandy. Why? To meet with the Israeli Chief of Staff, Ashkenazi. I leave it to your imaginations as to why. I hope that he is doing a reprise of what he did last June, or June of 2008, and telling the Israelis, look, looks like we're going to get this Iranian thing in hand now. Don't upset the apple cart, which they might be very strongly tempted to do at this point in time. So that's what I'd like those of you who are counseling your Congress people to know, is that don't be blithe, don't be nonchalant about an attack on Iran. Not only wouldn't it work, I think it would be a very immoral thing to do.
I just wanted to add one thing about the surgical strike against the Iranian nuclear program, which one sometimes reads about. This is one of the things that people just have to think a little bit through. Remember that our troops in Afghanistan are served by very long lines of communication going through Pakistan and now Russia. So one has to think, what would the governments of Russia and Pakistan do in reaction to news that Israel, with U.S. facilitation, had just attacked the Muslim neighbor of Pakistan and Russia? I don't think their reaction would be favorable. What would the Iraqi government do if Israeli warplanes overflew Iraq? Who controls Iraqi airspace? We do. It is now, though, officially Iraqi sovereign airspace. We have ceded that to Iraq. So we would have two choices. We could shoot down the Israeli aircraft, or we could let them fly through. If we let them fly through, we could either tell the Iraqi government about it or not tell the Iraqi government about it. In either case, we are in big trouble, because how is the Iraqi government going to maintain its legitimacy when it becomes a facilitator for an Israeli attack on the Shia regime next door? It's just unimaginable to me that Iraq would not, the Iraqi government would not to say, you have to leave, and you have to leave now. So these are some of the consequences of not a U.S. attack necessarily, but even facilitating or tolerating an Israeli attack. We have to think these things through.
You've both alluded to areas where there's been cooperation, even during the Bush-Cheney period, between the United States and Iran. My question is, what might be some of the benefits of actually moving back towards a normalization of relations with Iran? You've mentioned Afghanistan. Obviously, we're withdrawing from Iraq. That's a potential very sensitive thing. I'm wondering, since we usually talk about the downside, what would be the upside if we do get this kind of full normalization after more than 30 years?
There are a number of shared interests between the U.S. and Iran that we don't spend much time on, but let's say anti-narcotics. I see great similarities in the viewpoint between the government in Tehran and the government in Washington on narcotics and trying to do something about it. The Iranians are no friend of Al-Qaeda. We had some constructive cooperation for a while before we started beating the drum against the Iranians. I think that we could return to that if they were convinced that we were not a military threat to them, if we would stop talking about regime change. obviously in the commercial area, the U.S. Has a great deal of expertise in oil and gas development, which right now is pretty much seems to be between the Iranians and the Chinese. I think we would have an interest in contributing in that sector if we could move toward normalized relations. So I hope that we will use the leverage that we have, and we have considerable leverage, to go for realistic objectives and negotiations. Don't try to eliminate Iranian uranium enrichment capabilities. Concentrate on getting the International Atomic Energy Agency in the country on a permanent basis with greater transparency so that our confidence level can be raised about Iran's non-nuclear weapons intentions, and then go to work on finding common ground in these other areas. And there are obviously things where we're going to have big problems with, human rights among them. But we have some of those problems with a lot of other governments with whom we have fairly friendly relations.
Yeah, I would just add, after this catalog of benefits, of possible positives that would come out of this kind of thing, well, okay, what's the negative? Anybody? Come on, what's the negative? Our total identification with the policy of the State of Israel. They would complain, and so would a lot of your bosses. A lot of your bosses would be under great pressure to do everything they could to prevent rapprochement with Iran. And this is kind of a noxious sort of thing, because, it could be that this list, you could add toward the bottom more restraint on Hezbollah, more restraint on Hamas. It could come to that. And in my view, the Israeli attitude toward these kinds of things is incredibly myopic. And I think in the near term, not just the medium term, Israeli security will suffer greatly if this myopic, anti-negotiation, full power approach keeps being pursued.
Well, Moscow's warned Washington against striking Iran. Russia's chief of staff revealed on Wednesday the U.S. could attack Iran after wrapping up its campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan. He claimed his American counterpart had told him about the possibility. In an exclusive interview to RT's Spotlight program, General Nikolai Makarov outlined Moscow's concerns.
Russia is not afraid of a possible U.S. attack on Iran. We're just trying to predict the consequences of such a move. This is an important issue for us, as Iran is located near our borders, and it worries us. Another issue is that Iranian society is highly politicized and spiritually strongly united, and the country has many supporters abroad.
You mean throughout the Middle East?
Yes, and such an attack on Iran could lead to explosive consequences throughout the region. That is our primary concern, explosive events in Iran and in nearby countries.
If I understand correctly what you said at Wednesday's news conference, Moscow is trying to warn the U.S. against such a move?
That's correct. We've been warning against attack on Iran. Earlier, we warned of possible problems in Afghanistan, but no one listened to us. We hope that they will now listen and understand all the possible consequences of an attack.
This rhetoric directed against Iran has been ongoing for several years. In fact, it started in the immediate wake of the invasion of Iraq. And I think what is important to understand is that the United States, NATO, as well as Israel are involved and have been involved in planning a war directed against Iran. And what they want is to essentially have the support of public opinion, present Iran as a threat to global security due to its alleged nuclear weapons, which it doesn't have, and of course present a justification and a pretext for humanitarian intervention on behalf of the international community. What I think people have to understand is, A, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, and B, there are a number of European countries which are considered to be non-nuclear states which have nuclear weapons, and I'm talking about Belgium, Holland, Germany, Italy, and Turkey. These are 5 non-nuclear states which have nuclear weapons made in America, stationed in their military bases, and these are in fact targeted at Iran. It's a clear case of distortion and double standards. It's to build a war pretext incident, and I think what is very serious here is that if any kind of military action directed against Iran will immediately lead to escalation. Namely, at the moment we have 3 war theaters, 3 distinct war theaters in the Middle East. We have Afghanistan and overflowing into Pakistan on the one hand, we have Iraq and Palestine. Now the moment there is any kind of military action, punitive action directed against Iran, that whole region will flare up from the eastern Mediterranean right to the Chinese border. And we must also understand that this action against Iran is also indirectly targeting 2 main countries, China and Russia, which have extensive military cooperation agreements with Iran. And consequently, this has to be understood as part of a global war. If there is an attack on Iran, I think we must understand that we are potentially in a World War III scenario. That whole region flares up, and if other countries intervene, such as China or Russia, even in a passive way, we are in a World War III scenario. I know for a fact that this war has been prepared since late 2004 in terms of the stockpiling of weapons, establishing a state of readiness. All that is underway. Just about a year ago, the United States sent in a mission to Israel to modernize their air defense system, and the air defense system of Israel is now integrated into that of the United States and NATO, so that in effect what we're seeing is the coalescence of an alliance between the United States, NATO, and Israel. It's a formidable force in terms of capabilities. The issue is that U.S. military planners are often unaware of the broader consequences of their actions. They defined back in 2002, 2003, the notion that U.S. tactical nuclear weapons, what they call the mini nukes, are harmless to the surrounding civilian population. In fact, the Senate then approved the use of these tactical nuclear weapons in a conventional war theater, and they said they could in fact be used they could be used on a preemptive basis against Iran and even against other countries. So that what the nuclear doctrine is telling us is that we can actually use these nuclear weapons as humanitarian bombs, because civilians won't be affected. The only thing we're going to do is to go after the bunkers it's a bunker buster technology. And so that it's an extremely dangerous crossroads in which we are today. The United States has launched a military adventure at the global level with its NATO allies, and those who decide on these military actions believe their own propaganda. They actually believe that they're going to make the world safer by waging a nuclear attack on Iran, and they also believe they may also believe that Iran is a threat. And so that the whole propaganda ploy, which is presented in the Western media, has got completely out of whack. It's a propaganda ploy which justifies actions which could be devastating. We have a situation where the major political figures like Obama or Hillary Clinton are in the diplomatic arena, attempting to build this consensus, the constant and persistent reference to the war on terrorism as a justification for waging war in the Middle East, when in fact anybody who has some understanding of that region knows that what is at stake is the oil. Okay, and 60% of the oil and gas lies in the region, which extends from the tip of Saudi Arabia up to the Caspian Sea basin. It's a very strategic region. And why are they why are they demonizing Muslims? It's very simple. They're demonizing Muslims because the oil happens to be in Muslim lands. I undertook the calculation that something of the order of between 65 and 70%, depending on the estimates of the world's oil reserves, lie in Muslim countries. So that is why we demonize. That's why they demonize the Muslims, present them as enemies of the Western world, and ultimately, if those lands had been inhabited by Buddhists, they would have demonized the Buddhists. So that we're in a situation where we have a war of conquest. It's the conquest of oil and gas reserves. The United States of America has less than 2% of the global oil and gas reserves. That region, strategic region, has something of the order of 60%. And Iran has approximately 10% of global oil reserves, 5 times those of the United States of America. And it's very clearly indicated in national security documents that the objective of these wars, ultimately, that's not something they'll say in public, but the objective is ultimately to gain strategic control over oil and gas reserves, and also to exclude any kind of competing powers in the region, which include China and Russia, which of course are countries which have important interests in the region. They're also involved in the oil industry in a very pervasive way, and the idea is not only to make sure that we control that region, but also that we exclude any kind of possibility that countries in that region could trade or have international cooperation agreements with countries like China or
You never see me do this. I put this together in paint.net because I wanted to point out something for those of you who are not awake and what's going on. Right now, what we are looking at is World War III. In the making, guys. And I don't ever think it necessary to point something out to everyone. Now, of course, everybody knows that we've been in Iraq. And for those of you who don't know the Middle Eastern map, that's why I did this. Iraq, right here. I'm going to make a little circle here so you guys know where Iraq is. We've been in Iraq, and we've been in Afghanistan, and fighting there for a long, long time. See, I made it over there like a circle. Okay. Now, right now what's going on is we just attacked Libya, guys. Okay. That's over here where the X is. Okay. Major war going on there now. Call it what you will. Call it a no-fly zone. Call it whatever. But there's a major war going on there right now. Right now here, Egypt, uprisings. Major, major uprisings, guys. Major. Yemen. Right here, guys. Yemen. Major, major uprisings. Today, just today, folks, we had Jordan. And if you guys don't know what Jordan is, it's right near Saudi Arabia, guys. Right on top. Jordan. Syria, major uprisings. People are getting killed left and right over there. Major uprisings, and the government is just shooting them down with live fire. Syria. Okay. Bahrain. Bahrain over here, guys. It's a small little island over here. Bahrain. Look at this, guys. Just take a look at that map. Look at that. Now, the only country that we are not involved in right now, yet, I'll put the check marks on them. There aren't too many. Okay? We have Saudi Arabia, which is still good. And we still have Iran, which we haven't gone to war yet with. But those are the only two countries right now. Unbelievable, guys. What I just showed you. We are looking at World War III. And I don't say that very often. I never do this in a paint program to show you a visual representation of the whole Middle East. But that's what we're looking at. And of course, if Iran gets involved, you know Israel's getting involved. So you got the entire Middle East in a major war. So that's where we stand now, guys. I just thought I'd point that out. And, you know, I'm really sorry I missed that Town Baller's show tonight. It was probably a very good one, and I wanted to hear what was going on in Jordan. I think Jordan was the newest country to start unraveling. So that's where we stand now, guys. And I don't know. I hope you guys prepared. I hope the American people prepared for what's ahead, because you're looking at World War III, and that's the only way I can say it. Take it easy, folks. Stay safe. Be well. Bye.
امروز در راه روشن فردا دنیا می‌بیند عزم ما را فردا دنیا با حیرت خواهد دید